Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this great body of wisdom that's both in a written text before us and in the text of the faces before us as well. We're going to share in all of that wisdom, and hopefully we will be adding to it as well. If you'd like to go and unmute at this time, together we can recite our blessing, giving thanks for this beautiful, wonderful, rich opportunity of being together and of sharing together in this body of wisdom. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. We will read through our weekly Torah portion, which this week is Vayera, found in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, beginning with verse 1. We'll read through the English translation of it, and then I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collective collaborative conversation about it. And if those who are not reading could go on mute for a moment so that we can limit the amount of background distraction, that would be great. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll offer others an opportunity to read some verses as well. Once again, we're in the book of Genesis, chapter 18, verse 1. Adonai appeared to him by the terebinths of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them. And bowing to the ground, he said, Adonai, if it please you, do not go on past your servant. Let a little water be brought. Bathe your feet and recline under the tree. And let me fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. And then go on, seeing that you have come your servant's way. They replied, do as you have said. Kath, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 6?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, quick, 3 seahs of choice flour, knead and make cakes. Then Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and choice, and gave it to a servant boy who hastened to prepare it. He took the curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them, and he waited on them under the tree as they ate. They said to him, where is your wife Sarah? And he said, there, in the tent. Then one said, I will return to you next year, and your wife Sarah shall have a son. Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having her periods. And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I've lost the ability, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child as old as I am? Is anything too wondrous for Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh? I will return to you at the same season next year, and Sarah shall have a son. Sarah lied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was frightened. Came the reply, you did laugh.
Thank you. And Richard, would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 16 of chapter 18?
Chapter 18 is 15, 16. Yes. But Lot said to him,
We are in verse 16 of chapter 18.
Oh, verse 19, sorry about that. Sarah dissembled, saying, I did not laugh. But she was frightened. He replied, but you did laugh. The men set out from there and looked down toward Sodom, Abraham walking with them to see them off. Now the Lord has said, shall I hide from Abraham? What am I to do about it? Since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I have singled him out, that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right, in order that the Lord may bring about for Abraham and what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grave, I will go down to see whether they have acted altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. If not, I will know. The men went on from there to Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Abraham came forward and said, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that the innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you. Shall you not, the judge of all the earth, deal justly? And the Lord answered, if I find within the city of Sodom 50 innocent ones, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. Abraham spoke up, saying, here I venture to speak to the Lord. I'm but dust and ashes. But if the 50 innocent should lack 5, will you destroy the whole city for the want of the 5? And he answered, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. But he spoke to him again and said, what if the 40 should be found there? And he answered, I will not do it for the sake of the 40. And he said, let not the Lord be angry if I go on. What if they should be found there? And he answered, I will not do it if I find 35. And he said, I venture again to speak to the Lord. What if 20 should be found there? And he answered, I will not destroy for the sake of the 20. And he said, let not the Lord be angry if I speak here, but this last time. What if he should find there? What if 10 should be found there? And he answered, I will not destroy for the sake of the 10. When the Lord had finished speaking to Abraham, he departed, and Abraham returned to his place.
Thank you so much. And June, would you like to pick up there at the very start of chapter 19?
Thank you, Rabbi. The 2 angels arrived in Sodom in the evening as Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to greet them, and bowing low with his face to the ground, he said, please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house to spend the night, and bathe your feet, then you may be on your way early. But they said, no, we will spend the night in the square. But he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and entered his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. They had not yet lain down when the townspeople, the men of Sodom, young and old, all the people to the last man, gathered about the house. And they shouted to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may be intimate with them. So Lot went out to them to the entrance, shut the door behind him, and said, I beg you, my friends, do not commit such a wrong. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you may do to them as you please. But do not do anything to these men, since they have come under the shelter of my roof. But they said, stand back. The fellow, they said, came here as an alien, and already he acts the ruler. Now we will deal worse with you than with them. And they pressed hard against the person of Lot and moved forward to break the door. But the men stretched out their hands and pulled Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And the people who were at the entrance of the house, young and old, they struck with blinding light, so that they were helpless to find the entrance.
Thank you so much, June. Margot, would you like to read starting at verse 12?
Yes, thank you. It's so exciting. Then the men said to Lot, whom else have you here? Sons-in-law, your sons and daughters, or anyone else that you have in this city? Bring them out of the place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against uh, them before the Lord has become so great that the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who had married his daughters and said, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law as one who jests. As dawn broke, the angels urged Lot on saying, "Up, take your wife and your two remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." Still, he delayed. So the men seized his hands and the hands of his wife and his two daughters-in-law in the Lord's mercy on him, and brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, one said, "Flee for your life. I do not look behind you. Do not stop um, do not stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away." But Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lord, you have been so gracious to your servants and have already shown me so much kindness in order to save my life, but I cannot flee to the hills lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Look, that town there is near enough to flee to. It is such a little place. Let me flee there if it is such a little place, and let my life be saved." He replied, "Very well, I will grant you this favor too, and I will not annihilate the town of which you have spoken. Hurry, hurry, flee there, for I cannot do anything until you arrive there." Hence, the town came to be called Zor.
Thank you so much. And Sherry and Steve, would you like to read a little starting at verse 23?
Did you get it, Steve?
Yeah.
Okay. As the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zor, the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from the Lord out of heaven. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain, and all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife looked back, and she thereupon turned into a pillar of salt.
Next morning, Abraham hurried to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and looking down towards Sodom and Gomorrah and all the land of the plain, he saw the smoke of the land rising like the smoke of a kiln. Thus it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain and annihilated the cities where Lot dwelt, God was mindful of Abraham and removed Lot from the midst of the upheaval.
Thank you both so much. Let me invite Gary. Would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 30?
Yes, thank you. Together with his two daughters, Lot then went up from Zoar to live in the hill country, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave, he and his two daughters. The firstborn now said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man left on the earth to couple with us in the way of all the earth. Let us give our father wine to drink and lie with him, and give life to offspring through our father." So that night they gave their father wine to drink. The firstborn then went and lay with her father, who had no awareness of her lying down and getting up. On the morrow, the firstborn said to the younger, Seeing that last night I lay with my father, let us give him wine to drink tonight as well. Then you go and lie with him, so that we can give life to offspring through our father. So that night, too, they gave their father wine to drink. The younger got up and lay with him, and he had no awareness of her lying down and getting up. Lot's 2 daughters became pregnant through their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the present-day Moabites. The younger 2 bore a son and named him Ben-Ammi. He is the ancestor of the present-day Ammonites.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary. Hello, Rose. Would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 20?
Okay, let me unmute. In chapter 20. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Abraham journeyed from there to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he was sojourning in Gerar, Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She's my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are to die because of the woman that you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her. He said, "O Lord, will you slay people even though innocent?" He himself said to me, "She is my sister." And she also said, "He is my brother." When I did this, my heart was blameless and my hands were clean. And God said to him in the dream, "I knew that you did this with a blameless heart, and so I kept you from sinning against me. That was why I did not let you touch her. Therefore, restore the man's wife, since he is a prophet. He will intercede for you to save your life. If you fail to restore her, know that you shall die, you and all yours." Early next morning, Abimelech called his servants and told them all that had happened, and they were greatly frightened. Then Abimelech summoned Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? What wrong have I done to you that you should bring so great a guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done to me things that ought not to be done." "What then," Abimelech demanded of Abraham, "was your purpose in doing this thing?" "I thought," said Abraham, "surely there is no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. And besides, she is in truth my sister's, my father's daughter, though not my mother's, and she became my wife. So when God made me wander from my father's house, I said to her, let this be the kindness that you shall do me. Whatever place we come to, say there of me, he is my brother."
Thank you so much, Rose. Mark, would you like to read starting at verse 14 and take us into some verses in chapter 21?
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi. And Abimelech took flocks and cattle and men servants and maidservants, and he gave them to Abraham, and he restored to him his wife, Sarah. And Abimelech said, "Here is my land before you. Wherever it pleases you, you may dwell." And to Sarah he said, "Behold, I have given 1,000 pieces of silver to your brother. Behold, it is to you a covering of the eyes for all who are with you, and with all you shall contend." And Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his handmaids, and they gave birth. For Adonai had shut every womb of Abimelech's household because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. And Adonai remembered Sarah as he had said, and he did to Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham named his son, who had been born to him, whom Sarah had borne to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, "God has made joy for me. Whoever hears will rejoice over me." And she said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children?" for I have borne a son to his old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned.
Thank you so much, Mark. Jim, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 9?
Thank you, Rabbi. Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham playing. She said to Abraham, "Cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac." The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, do as she says, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him too, for he is your seed." Early next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent her away. And she wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone from the skin, she left the child under one of the bushes, and went out and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away, for she thought, "Let me not look on as the child dies." And sitting thus afar, she burst into tears. God heard the cry of the boy, and an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heeded the cry of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him by the hand, for I will make a great nation of him." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water and let the boy drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He dwelt in the wilderness and became a bowman. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
Thank you, Jim. Marty, would you like to continue there at verse 22?
Thank you, Rabbi. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, chief of his troops, said to Abraham, "God is with you in everything that you do. Therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my kith and kin, but will deal with me and with the land in which you have sojourned as loyally as I have dealt with you." And Abraham said, "I swear it." Then Abraham reproached Abimelech for the well of water which the servants of Abimelech had seized. But Abimelech said, "I do not know who did this. You did not tell me, nor have I heard of it until today." Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a pact. Abraham then set 7 ewes of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What meant these 7 ewes which you have set apart?" He replied, "You are to accept these 7 ewes from me as proof that I dug this well." Hence that place was called Beersheba, for there the two of them swore an oath. When they concluded the pact of Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, chief of his troops, departed and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk at Beersheba and invoked there the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham resided in the land of the Philistines a long time.
Thank you, Marty. And Justin, would you like to continue there at the very start of chapter 22?
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. And it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham, and he said to him, "Abraham," he said, "Here I am." He said, "Please take your son, your only one whom you love, yea, Isaac, and go away to the land of Moriah and bring him up there for a burnt offering on one of the mountains, of which I will tell you." And Abraham arose early in the morning, and he saddled his donkey, and he took his 2 young men with him, and Isaac his son. And he split the wood for a burnt offering, and he arose and went to the place which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. And Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder, and we will prostrate ourselves and return to you." And Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it upon his son Isaac. And he took into his hand the fire and the knife, and they both went together. And Isaac spoke to Abraham his father, and he said, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." And he said, "Here are the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And they both went together. And they came to the place of which God had spoken to him, and Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood, and he bound Isaac his son and placed him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. And an angel of God called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." And he said, "Do not stretch forth your hand to the lad, nor do the slightest thing to him. For now I know that you are a God-fearing man, and that you do not withhold your son, your only one, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes, and he saw, and lo, there was a ram, and after that it was caught in the tree by its horns, and Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. And Abraham named that place, "The Lord will see," as it is said to this day, "On the mountain, the Lord will be seen."
Thank you so much, Justin. Catherine, would you like to read starting at verse 15?
Thank you, Rabbi. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I swear," Adonai declares, "because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of heaven and the sands on the seashore, and your descendants shall seize the gates of their foes. All the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your descendants, because you have obeyed my command." Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Sometime later, Abraham was told, "Milcah too has borne children to your brother Nahor. Uz, the firstborn, and Buz, his brother, and Kemuel, the father of Aram, and Hesed, Hazo, Pildash, Jidlaph, and Bethuel, Bethuel being the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore children, Teba, Gaham, Tahash, and Makkah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a bit of focus study. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And those who may have received a copy of the study sheet by email, I apologize. There was a typo in it. It should say Rashomon Gate rather than Rashman Gate. So my wife Anna pointed out to me that there was an error there, so I corrected and posted the correct on our Facebook page. She said, "You know, it's typical to have the combination of words like Rosh with the name of some rabbi. So it could be a rabbi named Rashman. I don't know, but she says the correct name for the gate, of course, is Rosh Aman gate. Well, the focus for my looking and understanding this week's Torah portion this year comes from the very first significant Hebrew word in our Torah portion, and indeed it's the word that gives us the name of this Torah portion, Vayera. Vayera, which means in our translation, appeared, God appeared. It's based upon the Hebrew verb to see, and the number of times that the verb to see appears in this week's Torah portion is really quite striking. The notion of seeing, of appearance, seems to be a key theme in our Torah portion. So that's what got me to focus on what I might see in this week's Torah portion, and that's what I'd like to share with you. There is a lot of confusion about what is being seen, perhaps. Appearances seem to be less than clear. So let's look at how that shows up in the very opening of this week's Torah portion, which I have provided in a summarized form or edited form in number 1 on our study sheet. God appeared to Abraham by the terebinths of Mamre, as he sat there at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing near him. He saw them, and he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed down. He said, Adonai, if I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass on from your servant. The men set out from there and looked out upon Sodom, and Abraham walked with them to send them off. God said, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great. The men turned from there and went on to Sodom. As I read this carefully and read it over and over, there is a lack of clarity about exactly who is there and what is happening, because it begins by saying God appeared to Abraham, and then the next verse, which talks about what Abraham does, it says Abraham lifted up his eyes, and what did he see? He saw 3 men. Well, did he see God? Did he see 3 men? Did God become 3 men? And the verse goes on, because he rushes to those he sees. Well, is he now speaking Adonai to 3 men, or is he speaking to the God who appeared? And he goes on, if I found favor in your eyes, please do not pass on from your servant. Well, a lot of commentators are perplexed because they say, God appears to Abraham. Abraham sees 3 servants, and then does what? Says, excuse me for a moment, God. 3 people have showed up at my tent. I need to tend to them. Just please wait your turn until I've taken care of them. In any case, our verses go on saying, the 3 men eventually set out from them. They looked out on Sodom, and then Abraham walked with them to send them off. And then God again becomes the subject of the verse and says, the outrage of Sodom and Gomorrah is so great. And then our edited version has it say, the men turned from there and went on to Sodom. So did the men leave already for Sodom, at which point God says Sodom and Gomorrah is going to be destroyed? Were they still there? So a lot of what we're seeing here is somewhat, to me anyway, as in my reading of it, confusing as to who's there when, and what is happening. Well, what's interesting is this notion about seeing, of course, will come up again in the verses that Justin just read, where he talked about what happened on Mount Moriah. And because after the incident, the binding of Isaac and then eventually the release of Isaac, Abraham named that site Adonai Yireh, whence the present saying, on the mount of the Lord there is vision. So again, Adonai Yireh, that's based upon the Hebrew verb to see. Adonai is seen. Adonai has an appearance. Okay. So, and I point out in number 2, I provide here the Hebrew for both the opening of our Torah portion and the verse I just read about Mount Moriah. And you see there the Hebrew verb in Vayera, God appeared, and then Adonai Yireh, God will appear. What is interesting about both of those, which in a sense open up and then eventually close down our Torah portion, the book ending of our Torah portion, if you will, the verb to see is in both cases. It's what's known as the nif'al form. The nif'al form in Hebrew grammar is an interesting one because it is not a verb in which the subject is actually doing something. It's not really a verb in which it's passive, something's being done to the subject. It's not really a reflexive verb in form in which the subject is doing something to him or herself. Some Hebrew grammarians call this the middle voice. It is a form in which a subject is involved in the events that are being described by the verb, but is neither either the activist of the verb, nor the passive recipient of the action, nor doing something to itself, but is somehow involved in it. So there is, if you will, kind of a vague notion as to what exactly is happening with this nifal form of the verb. So with this notion about the lack of clarity about what is happening, especially around these verbs of to see and of appearance, I'd like to turn to the work of art that I've chosen for this week. And that is a wood sculpture. This by a young Japanese artist named Takahiro Iwasaki. And I found this work of art at the Portland Japanese Garden. We went there on Sunday, took a beautiful walk through this very serene, beautiful place. I have to say, I went into the garden and there were a lot of people there, and everyone was quiet, everyone was strolling calmly, and I allowed myself the conceit to imagine that everyone who entered through the gates into this Japanese garden, not one of those people would ever intentionally hurt another person. Everyone was being so respectful of one another's presence. Everyone there seemed to be there for the purpose of the Japanese garden's own mission, which is to reflect, to meditate, to be more harmonious with the natural surroundings. So here, there is a special exhibit by this Japanese artist, Takahiro Iwasaki. He is renowned for creating what's known as reflection models. He takes classic Japanese architecture and then hand builds out of wood model replications of them. But what's significant about all of them is that he constructs them in such a way so as to make them appear as if they are being reflected in a pond of water, or hung and suspended in midair. And then the bottom piece of all these structures is designed in such a way to make it seem as if a piece of the structure above is being reflected in a pond of water. He does this, he says, to give people an opportunity to reflect on something from the past, to contemplate it, and to perhaps to recontextualize it, and to perhaps gain new insight into what that structure might mean and to what it might mean for us today. The model that he built for the exhibit at the Japanese Garden here in Portland is a model of the gate known as the Rashomon Gate. The Rashomon Gate was one that was built in the imperial days of Japan, and it was the gateway to the then capital city of Kyoto, which stood as the capital. It was it started to deteriorate, and then by the 15th century, it was completely torn down and destroyed. It's a significant gate because it is repurposed in the 1950 movie by Akira Kurosawa, this movie called Rashomon. And in that movie, the gate becomes a focal point involving a murder of a man who had witnessed his wife being raped. And the movie revolves around a series of testimonies that's given by a number of people who have some involvement in the incident. And they each give a very different and contradictory view about what happened. And it's not clear from the movie who was involved, who was telling the truth, who committed the murder. Was it some bandits? Was it the man who committed the rape? Was it perhaps the woman herself who was angry at her husband because of how he responded or not? Was it the husband who committed suicide because of the shame and the horror of what had happened? The movie ends with no clarity from Kurosawa about who did this. There is no clear conclusion. All that we're left with are these uncertainties, ambiguities, and lack of clarity about what happened. So this notion from Kurosawa is, in a sense, he does what Torah itself does many times, which leaves it up to us, invites us, if you will, as readers of his movie, as readers of Torah, to draw deeper conclusions out of the ambiguity that the text itself presents to us. So what do we do about truth? How do we know what really happened? If you turn over the sheet, I share with you a bit of midrash about truth. Rabbi Shimon said, when God was about to create Adam, the ministering angels split into contending groups. Some said, let Adam be created. Others said, let him not be created. That is why it is written in Psalm 85, mercy and truth collided, righteousness and peace clashed. So far, what we have is this image about God saying, I'm going to create a human being, and there's a division among the ministering angels as to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. And so this clash is what's in effect being at least initially described by the Psalm. Mercy and truth collided, righteousness and peace clashed. So while all this is happening, the angels are arguing over one another. The Midrash goes on. The Holy Blessed One took truth and threw it to the ground. The angel said, Sovereign of the universe, why do you do this? And God's answer, let truth arise from the ground. Thus it is written in Psalm 85, let truth spring up from the earth. I think the rabbis present this as a way of saying truth never has an absolute certainty to it. Truth ultimately is what we decide to be true. It is a human enterprise to create truth. It is an awesome responsibility, and it is the one that we are handed not only by our Torah, not only by our Midrash, but, if you will, by our filmmaker, Akira Kurosawa, and perhaps by our sculptor as well, asking us, what do you make of this gate that once stood and is no longer? And I, I, who was born in Hiroshima, ask you of this. What do you make of that which was destroyed? I'd like to conclude and then invite you to share with me what you saw in our Torah portion by sharing with you a poem by Rumi called The Guest House. It's a poem that, to me anyway, reveals the layers of possibilities that we can see in any given moment. A physical possibility, a spiritual possibility, an ethical possibility. Let's share. Let me share with you his poem. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house, empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I'd love to know what you saw in the reading of this week's Torah portion. If you'd like to raise your hand, I'd love to invite you to speak up. Please, Marty, and then Rose. Thank you, Marty.
Well, I think this portion is misnamed. I think it should be elusive truth and not vision. The entire portion, everything about it is elusive, and it's hard to know what's happening, which you started to talk about. I'm just going to extend that discussion. When Abraham encounters Abimelech, there's an insinuation that he wanted Sarah sexually, and yet she was described as someone who was very elderly, 100 years old, beyond menopause, unable to have children. So that didn't really make any sense. Why would a ruler who probably has access to many women, why would he lust after Sarah? It's a contradiction. It doesn't make sense. Then we have the incident, we have Sodom and Gomorrah. So all these people are killed because they're committing, they're immoral. And what happens to the people who God saves? They commit incest. Well, why should they have been saved? Didn't make sense. And Lot's wife gets turned to salt just for turning back. And then there's the slight of the, when they talk about the two daughters of Lot, that they become, they sire great populations through incest. So that sounds like it's the terrible we're getting. Then there's the sacrifice of Isaac. There's certainly subterfuge by God, but in a way it doesn't make sense at all, because in the previous discussion, they talked about how Sarah is going to have a child and Abraham is going to be the ancestor of the progenitor of a great people. Well, how can that happen if he kills his son? So did Abraham ever believe that God wanted him to kill his son? So there's the truth in every single way is elusive, and it's not clear what is true.
Thank you. There's also a piece in which it seems as if God dissembles as well. When God says, why did Sarah laugh, saying, how can I bear a child when I am so old, and relieves her of the responsibility of having said, well, my husband's so old. So there, I appreciate the fact that you're amplifying this whole miasma of unclarity and confusion and the irony of calling it a place of being seen, and that Mount Moriah, the climax, is this place of vision, because what you're pointing out is it's not very clear vision if it is vision. So thank you for that. Let me call upon Rose and then Gary.
Well, yeah, and I think, I think that those are all really good points, Marty. This Parsha, more than almost any of the other ones, has this very dreamlike quality. It's almost like a Fellini movie. Like stuff is just kind of happening, and it's not really clear. Like the angels, first there are 3 angels, men who show up, but only 2 of them go to Sodom and Gomorrah. And there are all sorts of, and at one point Hashem says, should I tell Avraham what I'm going to do? And, it seems to imply, oh, it's about Sodom and Gomorrah, but maybe not. I mean, it could be about the Akedah. It could be about a whole bunch of stuff that you just, you can't tell. And so people are just kind of stumbling around, and eventually both Hagar and Avraham seem like they are committed to a certain undesirable situation, but at some point they expand their vision and they see there's an alternate, there's a plan B available. Hagar sees the well, which was there all the time. Avraham sees the ram, who was also probably there all the time. And, it's very interesting because I think, Marty, you're right about Avraham. I think Avraham in some ways was calling Hashem's bluff. Because he says to the servant, the carriers or whoever they are, he says, we will be down. We're going to go up and sacrifice. And he says, we will be down. So is he lying to them? And the same thing Isaac says, where is the ram, or where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says, Hashem will provide the sacrifice, and it's always looked like Hashem, that Abraham was just trying to keep him calm, but probably not. So actually, he was going through the motions. He was casting his bread upon the waters, as it says in Ecclesiastes, with faith that Hashem would pull him out of it.
So one of the things that both you and Marty are kind of bringing out about this week's Torah portion, at least on an ethical level, is that we live in a world that is less than 100% clear, and we need to make decisions about what to do, what's right and what's wrong, in more of a miasma of opaqueness than in a great sea of clarity. So perhaps that's one of the ways in which Torah is kind of training us. This is the world that you live in, and you're going to need to make decisions within it. Let me call upon Gary. Thank you, Rose.
So I had a thought, but then I listened to Martin and Rose, and now they've thrown me for a bit of a loop. So I might need your help, Rabbi, to help articulate what I'm trying to say. Faith is what this Torah, that's what's talking to me during this Torah portion, is faith. And in my mind, having the ultimate faith would be Abraham willing to sacrifice his son. And obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, I believe there's gradations of faith. I certainly don't have that much faith, but I do have enough that when I do come to study Torah, when I read something I don't agree with, my default is that the Torah is right and I have to figure it out. And that's what I love about this class, is that we try to do it logically or pragmatically, but at the end, it just takes faith that this is the right way and I have to figure it out. And the other thing that I've realized is that, there's obviously a lot of horrible things going on in the world. And sometimes for me, my way of getting out of it might be a swim in the ocean, or meditation, or a single malt scotch. But at the end, I have found that just having that faith is what keeps me going. And so that's what I got out of this portion.
So, well, you bring up a really profound theme, Gary, which is the notion of faith, and what is faith within Judaism. And what I got from what you said is that faith is the extent that you are on a path that will lead you in a direction of comfort and wholeness and well-being. And along that path, the particular steps that one needs to take will not always be clear. So, for example, in this week's Torah portion, because you bring up the binding of Isaac and what's known as the Akedah. So, a lot of commentators say, what was Abraham's state of mind? Was he just blindly obeying a voice that said, kill your son? Or was something else happening? And the commentators point to what Abraham says is, I'm going ad ko, to there. And they ponder that, or actually to hear is what it means, to hear. And they look at that as it doesn't make any sense. Why would you say, I'm going to go to here if he's already here? And so they point out that the word ko is also used much earlier in Abraham's relationship with God, when God says, I'm going to make your progeny be as many as the sands that there are and the stars in the sky. And the word ko is used there as well. And so Rashi raises up for us in his commentary, the Midrash that says, what Abraham was doing was he was going to explore ko, that place of promise, because if God really meant to keep the promise, then surely it couldn't mean that he was to kill his only son, who was supposed to inherit this covenant. So that he's going to, in fact, go up to the mountain to have an interrogation with God about, how could you possibly mean that I'm going to kill my son if you said he's going to be the inheritor of all this? And so it is not as if Abraham is going up to kill the son. He's going up there to interrogate the source of this promise. So that is in a sense of, we're given this path, but every step along the path for us is a source of questioning and interrogation, and eventually decisions that we make about what's the ethically and the morally and the spiritually right thing to do in order to honor the path that we're on. So thank you very much for bringing up that profoundness. Let me call upon Catherine and then Richard here. Please, Catherine. Hi, Catherine, would you like to unmute? There you go. Oh, Catherine. Okay.
Yes, I'm.
Okay, we hear you.
Hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on the artwork, and hopefully it can tie into some of the previous statements. What I got from the artwork very strongly was not just the layering of narratives that we find in Rashomon and that we find in this Parshat as well, but precarity, that there are these moments of precarity. And we have this precarity in the Parsha, the precarity in that moment when Abimelech is with Sarah, the precarity where the angels are visiting Lot, and we don't know what's going to happen. It sort of turns into this volatile moment. And then, of course, the tremendous precarity when Abraham takes out the knife, and the son is there and everything is poised for this terrible sacrifice to happen. So thinking of how sometimes it takes moments of precarity to discover our faith, or the way or the path that our faith can take.
Wow. I love that notion, precarity. And I feel like it perhaps also speaks a little bit to the ideas and feelings that Gary was bringing up as well. So thank you very much for bringing that. Let me invite Richard here, and then Mark and Justin. Richard?
Thank you, Rabbi. Yeah, this business of there's vision on the mountain brought to mind something I've experienced working with delusional people who are in the middle of a delusion, what we call delusion. And there's no reason not to suppose, even though the paintings we see many times are of an angel in the sky with a knife, taking the knife away. And well, maybe that's what people around saw going on. God did something, but that doesn't mean that's what happened. I know that people that are seeing delusions, which are formations of some kind of energy out there that's going through their eyes, they also report them. And I don't know that one couldn't make a case for when Abraham sees the three men, Elohim, and when he sees God from the mountain, what's going on, that he isn't seeing God as well. He's communicating with him. He's also seeing these three men at the same time. But people who are not in contact with God, who are not drawing in the energies and responding to that conversation that's going on with God, don't see them. So it seems odd to us that it's vague and ambiguous as to what happened. But I don't know that both couldn't be happening. And my own thought about Isaac is that Isaac put his hand on his father's hand and said, no. I'm all the generations, stop this. And Abraham might right then have nodded with God and said, that's it, but you had faith to follow me, and here we are in the here that you sent out to go there to. You were right. I'm kind of piggybacking on what you said about him. So it all seems perfectly unclear to me, but I have the faith to believe my way of looking at it, that Abraham really is in contact with God. And he's kind of jerking him around and jerking us all around to try and get us to the place to, as someone said up there, to have the faith, be on the path of saying that this is going in the right direction. And after all, we're here.
Thank you, Rick. Mark, please share with us.
Thanks, Rabbi. I'm looking at this portion sort of like, I guess it could be a soap opera or a play or something, but I'm very interested in the character arc of Abraham and what happens to him, and when does he actually develop this notion of faith? What was the catalyst? In the beginning of the Parsha, we read over and over again how he cleverly bargained with God to the point that God was so easily giving way to Abraham's plea to save those if there were righteous people. And yet, at the very end, God has convinced Abraham that he would have to slay his own son as a sacrifice, and Abraham does nothing. So we're led to believe that absent the angel who interceded at the last minute, the deed would have been done. So what happened to Abraham? That's my question. What happened to Abraham? And it makes me wonder also, applying this just to human behavior, what happens to us when we're confronted with something that we don't really understand? And I'm, obviously right now, my mind is always in my head is always dwelling on what's going on in Israel and trying to understand what people have to cope with in such a dire situation, translating that into personalizing it into the character of Abraham. I'm just trying to work this out for myself. Yeah.
So a couple of quick comments, Mark. One, of course, the text itself doesn't tell us why it is that Abraham and God first come in contact with one another, why God enters Abraham's life. It just says God spoke to Abraham and said, leave your native land. So the Midrash and commentary fill it in by saying what happened was Abraham was so curious about the nature of existence and what it is that causes this world to continue to exist when around it there seems to be so much violence. That's the point at which God enters and says, in a sense, you're the one who's going to start on this new path because you dare to ask those kinds of questions. And in a sense, if we accept Rashi's commentary about what is happening with at Mount Moriah, it's a continuation of that relationship that Abraham has with God, which is, really? You want me to kill my son? I need to go up there to find out what that really is all about and to inquire of you about that, to interrogate you, God, about that. So that's a kind of a notion about the arc, the trajectory of Abraham's own personal narrative. The other point I'd like to share, what you remind me about, is the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas. He says, if you read the verses carefully, what happens is this. It says that Abraham picks up a knife, and then an angel says, Abraham, Abraham, and he answered, Hineni, here I am. And the angel says, do not raise your hand against the boy. And Levinas says, why does it say, don't raise your hand against the boy? Why doesn't it say, don't stab the boy? Why does it say, don't stick him with a knife? Why doesn't it say, drop the knife? And Levinas says, it's because at that moment of awakening, Abraham looks into the face of his son and sees there a preciousness, a life that gives meaning to his own life, and he drops the knife. That he has already dropped the knife when the angel says, stop. So that's what Levinas says is the moment of a face seeing another face, to which one becomes indebted and owes gratitude, and he drops the knife. So those are just some thoughts that come to mind from what the comments that you made. So thank you. I have just a couple more, and then I'll draw to conclusion. So let me go on. Sherry and Steve, and then Justin. So Sherry and Steve.
Well, there are a number of things. I don't know if there's enough time. I enjoyed reading the psalm that you suggested about faithfulness and truth meet, justice and well-being kiss, and truth springs up from the earth. I was thinking about that, and I was also thinking about the Rumi poem, and also the comments about the fog of war and Gaza and so on. And and I guess part of my question is, how you put this all together this week, and how you came to put all of this together for a lesson. So it's a question that I have for you. And the next thing is that, which I know gets brought up every year, is, poor Isaac, he nobody's talking about what this poor boy feels, and how much is he understanding developmentally at whatever age he is, what's going on, and about the knife and about the sacrifice, and what happens afterwards, after all of this. He has this experience with his father, and about faithfulness, truth, trust, in verses 11 and 12 and Psalm 85. So anyway, those are just some of my thoughts I have. Wondered if you could comment.
Sure. So a couple of things. One, I guess what inspired me was I don't use our study sessions to talk about political events and things like that. But I will say that I have been kind of observing how people can look at the same set of events and see them so very differently, and ascribe very different meanings to the same set of events, and consequently draw very different responses to that set of events. And so I was struck when I realized, oh, we're starting off, we're going to be reading a Torah portion called Vayera about seeing, about appearance. And yet in the Torah portion itself, as we discussed and Marty also emphasized, there is, it's not clear what it is was being seen or what it is we are to see and so forth. So that's the notion that I was playing with, and that's why Iwasaki's wood sculpture there, which is under the rubric that the Japanese garden has given to it of the nature of perception. That's the context in which they place his body of work here. What does it mean to perceive? And will people perceive the same things when they look at the same phenomena? And we know that we don't, right? We know that because of our different backgrounds and our different vested interests and experiences, that we see things differently. So then it becomes, as the Psalm says, then it becomes our work to determine what is truth. And in Judaism, truth is driven by a sense of what is just, ultimately. And it is less a kind of being clear about what actually happened and the phenomena involved, as it is crafting a reality that is full of justice. And so that these are the themes that we're playing with. And so I appreciate very much you're asking these questions, because they are the profound ones. Thank you. And let me call upon Justin, if you'd like to share with us.
Thank you, Rabbi, for hosting this incredible discussion. Thank you. I think, I mean, I'm wondering about the very nature of tefillah and of prayer, and of the nature of tefillah as the approach. Rav Soloveitchik, in the beginning of one of the earlier stone sidurs, talks about it's approaching Hashem, and it comes and he gives the example of Abraham after his bris, after there's an agreement, now finally being able to approach Hashem, and he approaches him precisely on the issue of Sodom and Gomorrah. That's tefillah, and it's confronting to me the essential amorality of the divinity, that is destructive as it is creative. It's 50-50 on Hashem's side, but it's the tefillah that's coming at Hashem that finally is creating some sort of stance against this amoral divinity. So I'm gonna let that be.
So first of all, these are profound. So first of all, there's in the Talmud the story about someone, a rabbi who sees the destruction of the Second Temple, wanders through it, and then senses the presence of God there. And the presence of God says to the rabbi, "Bless me." And what blessing does the rabbi offer? The rabbi says, "May your mercy overcome your anger and your sense of absolute judgment. May that be what prevails." And the Midrash goes, that God bowed God's head. So it is a radical, it begins to display the radical notion that human beings have some kind of impact on what we call God. That we have the capacity to forestall the complete sense of what's happened here with Sodom and Gomorrah, that we have the capacity to forestall the complete sense of judgmental rage that the source of the universe can unleash. And Kabbalah takes it even further and more radically, and says, indeed, how we live has an effect on the source of all things that we call God. And we encountered a little bit of a hint of that when we looked at last week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha, and I suggested that what that is hinting at is that God saying, I know you want to get close to me. I know that you want to be in touch with me. I know that you want to understand my ways. And the way to do that is to get to know yourself. The way to me is through you. And this is what the Hasidic tradition really begins to emphasize. It begins to, in a sense, reverse the focus of spirituality, which is rather than focusing on something outside of myself, rather than focusing on something that is cosmic, it says, focus on something within yourself. Transform yourself. And Justin, you raised the notion of tefillah, and what is so profound about the word for prayer in Judaism, lehit palel, which is where we get tefillah from, is that it is a reflexive verb. And so it is a verb that means question, judge, and interrogate yourself. So that our form of prayer is not designed to ask something of an external being we call God. It is a moment and an exercise of challenging ourselves, to transform ourselves, to refine ourselves. If we do that, we bring the divine into the world. And that's our mission, to make this world a place where the divine dwells. So I want to thank everyone for this very rich and profound evening of discussion, of understanding that we all stand at these gates that have existed before us, these gates that have often been sites of discord and violence, lies and deceit, but we have the opportunity to reflect upon them and to make them into gateways into a better world. So thank you all very much. God bless you all. I look forward to our next gathering. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I guess they didn't hear.